Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 37 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Karl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today by my colleague, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
I'm still ill. I'm not liking this. I'm not used to being ill for more than a few days. Don't like this.
So you're going for the sympathy vote from the listeners because you didn't get any from me. And where's Maz today?
Oh, in the house. We've got a new cat tree. So she's
Oh,
abandoned me for the new cat tree.
fair enough. Have you covered it in catnip just to get it
No, both of the kids
in?
are out, so it's quiet inside, and it's like, oh, okay, fine.
Very good. Well, we're not here to talk about John's cat. So if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know that every week I collate a list of AWS news in my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I select a subset of those articles that we would like to talk to you about in a little bit more detail. So we have such a list of articles for you this week. And the first one was on InfoWorld last week. And the title is AWS releases Cloud Institute virtual program to train developers. So we do talk about AWS training from time to time. We're usually talking about what free training is available from AWS, but this one is definitely not free. The subtitle says the 1-year program, which consists of 3 courses a quarter, is priced at $7,650. So it's right at the other end of the spectrum. It's actually quite expensive as far as AWS training goes. So why might an aspiring developer want to pay $7,650, do you think, John, for this Cloud Institute?
Yeah, it's a funny one. Like boot camps and things are not new. This is obviously the first one of these we've seen from AWS, but paid for programming boot camps that typically focus on like web development technologies, just because they're in vogue, I think, are not uncommon. They're not. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Most of them are somewhere in between. The reason I think you want to pay for like a 1-year program is it's a similar sort of money, at least in the UK, as like a master's degree. I think they're about £10,000. So it's in that kind of ballpark sort of money. And it's a 1-year, what does it say? It's 12 courses over 4 quarters. And it's pretty intensive. So the idea being that if you've got both the funds to fund it and the funds to fund yourself whilst you're going through said course, it's going to be a much faster and more in-depth way of soaking up AWS knowledge. Because if you look at, say, the free training, they're 20 or 30 or 40 hours or whatever. And the idea is you get maybe 1 cert at the end of it, if you're lucky, but probably not. With this, it's foundational topics, it's cloud computing, it's networking, it's databases, it's storage, it's Python, it's machine learning, and so on and so on and so on. And of course, generative AI, because you have to today, don't you, I think. But the idea being that much like a much like a boot camp, it gives you a much broader grounding than the free training, which is covering kind of like one thing. So that's kind of why you'd want to do it. But it's not just the cost of the program, because it's £7,500 plus tax. You've then also got to be able to live whilst you're doing this program. So odds are you can't do it around a full-time job. Probably. I don't know. I mean, some people are mad and work 100 hours a week. So maybe you could do nights and do this in the day and sleep when you're dead. But most people are going to do this as their full-time job, as it were.
Mm-hmm. One thing that surprised me was that after a year of study and $7,500 investment, that you come out of it with only associate level, cloud practitioner associate level certs. I would have thought after that intensive training that perhaps you might be ready to sit a pro or specialty level exam.
I mean, maybe you are ready for it, but what you got to bear in mind is the pro and the specialties. The who are these for exams? In the exam guidance, who are these for? It says people that have been working in the cloud or with this particular technology for 2 to 5 years. That's 2 to 3 years possibly, and you won't have been if you've done that program. If that's all you've done, you'd be working with it for a year. So just literally the letter of the who is this for? It doesn't fit. So maybe that's it. And I mean, possibly someone that has a bit of experience in databases anyway might be ready to do the databases specialty afterwards. Maybe not. But also bear in mind the amount of time it takes industry professionals to pass the pro exams. Like I was studying for 6 months, I want to say, on and off, around doing it every day anyway. They're not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I found interesting in this was that they talk about aspiring developers as the target market for this. But in the academy, they will actually design and develop a working application that demonstrates their skills and ability to use AWS services and Python code. So I guess that's significantly more than one would typically achieve when studying for cloud practitioner and solutions architect associate. Potentially this is going to be a very useful thing to show to prospective employers. And in fact, there are some partner organizations, if I recall from reading the article. So a couple of big
these things work on
GSIs.
partner organizations and things, don't they? If you look at the, I forget the name of the exact program, but the getting into like the retraining, restart. That's all run by partner organizations. So AWS don't tend to run these things themselves. Granted, they probably provide a lot of materials for it, but they don't tend to run them.
Of course, as with lots of new initiatives, it's only available in America initially. Us Europeans may have to wait a little bit longer if we want to do the Cloud Institute virtual program, or perhaps you can just do it remotely, because I don't think you need to attend in person. I think there are opportunities to attend in person,
yeah, it's a funny one. It is. I mean, all these things happen in the States first, but the way that they've kind of said, your minimum requirements, as you say, aspiring developers based in the US who are at least 18 and have a high school diploma or equivalent degree. A degree outside of America means something entirely different, but equivalent qualifications, if you like. So I think a high school diploma in the States is the same as GCSEs or A levels in this country. It's like it's not quite they don't line up particularly neatly, but it does seem to be a way of saying, well, rather than go and do a 3 or a 4 year degree as they do in the States, because again, college in the States is rather different to anywhere else. Rather than going and spending loads of money on a college degree, you can come and do this instead. Do it for a year. You've paid a lot less money because you hear the stories coming out of the States of hundreds of thousands of dollars people have spent on these things. And then you can go and earn a buttload of money because you don't need a degree to work in the cloud. You don't need a degree to work in development. You don't need to be, a computer science graduate. If you can find an interviewer that's not going to ask you about, I don't know, algorithm modifications and tree sorting and all that sort of nonsense. Because how often do you actually do that? You never, because you're a salesman. But
with AWS certifications, now the same number of AWS certifications as you. Previously, I was able to claim more AWS certifications than you, but I let one lapse. So,
I'm working on it.
A salesman who has held more consecutive AWS certifications than you. Anyway, let's not turn this into a I can't. The word I was going to use there is not appropriate for our YouTube channel.
No, it's gonna break the age appropriate filter, isn't it?
So let's not continue this one-upmanship on the episode. But just to wrap that one up, anything that helps to address the skills shortage in the market is welcome, in my opinion. And I think this definitely seems to go a little bit further than some of the other academy programs that I've seen, where you come out with just certs. Having had that real-world experience of developing a working app is fantastic. So well done, AWS, and look forward to seeing the first graduates from this program. So on to our next article this week, which is on the AWS Cloud Operations and Migrations blog. And let's see if I can say this one without my teeth falling out. Identify AWS Systems Manager patch compliance status with AWS CloudTrail Lake. I managed it. There we go. That is quite a wordy title. But Systems Manager patch compliance status is something we've actually been identifying as an issue within our current customer base. So potentially this is an answer, if not the answer, to our patch compliance issue that we've been trying to resolve ourselves. Walk us through this one, John. Tell us a bit more about it.
So let's do a few definitions and hopefully I can avoid coughing. whilst I talk about this one. So Systems Manager is, I've said this before, it's a loose collection of tools that allow you to manage your, what's the word I'm looking for? Manage your fleet of EC2s. It's more designed for kind of large enterprise scale customers, but absolutely everybody can and should be using it because it just makes your life a whole lot easier. You don't have to get onto servers to run commands and things. It's great. Patch compliance. So there's a part of Systems Manager called Patch Manager, and it does it kind of exactly what it says on the tin. Using the Systems Manager agent, which is installed on 95% of all EC2s these days, and certainly on anything launched since about 2018, 2017, something like that. Apart from, particularly weird AMIs, Common or Garden, Windows, Ubuntu, Amazon Linux will have the agent pre-installed. So it uses that agent to patch your servers. Brilliant. We like that because it means that your servers are kept up to date with the latest patches, be that security or application, and you could configure all of this so that you can say, I want it to wait for 7 days and then apply everything that's been around for 7 days, because you don't necessarily want to apply it on day one, because odds are if there's a bug in a software update, it'll be found on day 1 or day 2. So if you wait kind of 7 days, then those bugs will have been fixed and it'll be fine to install, usually. Minor caveat to that is Ubuntu doesn't support it because Ubuntu's repos are silly and don't supply build dates. So that's rather annoying, but that's by the by. Compliance status is whether or not your instances have outstanding patches, because you can scan and install at different schedules. So your instance could become non-compliant because a new patch has been available and it's not been installed yet. And these things tend to auto-remediate, they'll tend to clean themselves up if you've got your schedules kind of set up properly. However, the compliance status GUI is only valid for right now. It's not giving you any kind of historical data, which is what I think this is kind of trying to solve. So the solution itself is hooking up CloudTrail Lake, which is a data lake for kind of log data, primarily CloudTrail. AWS Config, which is used to store the state and change of state for basically your entire AWS ecosystem. They charge you based on, I think, number of items and how often they change and that kind of thing. But it will just kind of record the status of everything. So you've got 10 EC2s and they're in this status and they're on and they're off, and you've got guard duty enabled and so on. It'll kind of track loads of things. And then Systems Manager to kind of do the patching itself and worry about that. And it's hooking all of those up. And there's a couple of policies and things you need to do. And it kind of walks you through doing all of that. The upshot of CloudTrail Lake is much like a number of the other kind of data store lake-esque solutions that AWS have got, is you can query it with SQL. So you don't have to go kind of trawling through logs and all the rest of it, because I just want to find the compliance status of this particular instance over time. I want to know when it was and when it wasn't and when it remediated and all that kind of thing, without having to go long form looking through loads of logs. So that's kind of where CloudTrail Lake is quite good. Quite why you have to use CloudTrail Lake, I don't actually know. I suspect it's just the easiest thing to get it to play nicely with, because logs are difficult generally. But then if you are running this, if you are kind of interested by this, and I'll certainly kind of play with this as well a bit more, there is a thing to note that none of this is free. So Systems Manager is free. CloudTrail Lake is not free. It has ingest costs and storage costs. So if you're just playing with this, do make sure you clean it up afterwards, or you will end up with a bill that you didn't want.
And so is it just ingest costs, or do you get charged when you're querying it as well?
I don't think you're charged for query. It's ingest and storage.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear you're going to have a play with it, because potentially that is going to resolve an issue.
When I clear out a load of sprint work.
Yeah. Priorities. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, let's skip on to our next post then, which is also on the AWS Cloud Operations and Migrations blog. This one is about auto-remediating best practice deviations detected by AWS Trusted Advisor. So Trusted Advisor, of course, is notifying you regularly of any deviations from best practice. It's running a whole bunch of best practice checks against your AWS infrastructure. And this article goes on to talk about how you can potentially auto-remediate some of those. So is that a good idea, do you think, John?
In some cases, yeah. So trusted advisor recommendations are generally a bit kind of noddy, if we're honest. It's here's a thing we found. Yeah, okay, I know about that. Go away. Or here's a thing we found. Yes, that's deliberate. Go away. Don't really care. I don't like the. I mean, yes, it's a blog article and they're trying to fill screen space and they're telling you how to do it. But I don't like that this isn't a thing I can just turn on. If I'm really honest, because if you look at I think it's Inspector. It might be one of those types of things, possibly Guard Duty. You can just go remediate, push a button, and it will go off and fix the problem for you because it'll be, something that it's capable of fixing. And in this case, what you've got is Trusted Advisor finding a problem, sending an event bridge notification to then a step function that you've set up, and then a load of lambdas that kind of deal with that specific use case. So it's not auto remediating everything under the sun. It's auto remediating things that you think might come up regularly. And the example they've given here is exposed access keys, which shouldn't happen, but it absolutely does and can. So maybe that's something that you want to look at doing because it will go, oh, you've got your access keys exposed, and then they'll be magically kind of blocked and deleted and sort of all the rest of it. But I don't understand why, if they can detect it, why can't they just solve that for me?
I guess, yeah, what's the, why would you not want to resolve your exposed access keys?
Yeah. What I'd like is a notification, an email, something that gets in my face that says, by the way, you've got access keys exposed. Would you like to go and get rid of those? I push a big button on the email that goes, yes, please. And it does it. Like, why do I need to write all of this?
Yeah, because I guess you've got to write the Lambda functions that it describes in the article.
Yep.
I
mean, they supply the code and things for you, but you're still kind of doing all of this, as it were. When they've clearly done it, why can't they productize this?
Yeah. I did wonder the same about the previous thing, actually. But
I mean, yeah, AWS has a bit of a habit of this. They talk about taking away the undifferentiated heavy lifting and then writing a blog on a load of undifferentiated heavy lifting, and then you have to go and do it. And what? You've clearly worked this out. So maybe it's an artifact of the two pizza teams, but the people writing these blog posts and what have you, maybe they are feeding it up to the product teams, but these things are not being integrated into the products, and they should be.
Well, perhaps they're in a very long queue somewhere that waiting to be prioritized or voted on, or however AWS prioritizes these things. So, can you think of any other examples that you might want to auto remediate? This one talks about the exposed access keys, but what else might it tell you about that you might want to auto remediate?
I mean, Trusted Advisor is a funny one because it gives you different recommendations, I think, depending on your support contract. I think I might be wrong about that, but I think it does. So it's the recommendations it's got is things like exposed access keys, which we discussed, S3 bucket permissions, security groups with unrestricted access, those kinds of things. So those are the things that you probably want to handle. But I mean, we've had this before where you want your buckets all to be private. You come into a new environment, maybe they're a customer, maybe you're a new engineer, and you go, why are all of these public? Make them all private, and then stuff breaks because of historical reasons why they've been made public. And granted, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be serving assets through CloudFront, realistically. But historic reasons, people have done that because they knew that's how they knew it worked, and then you've broken things, which is why you don't always want to auto remediate these things.
Yeah. Speaking of support, that is one of the prerequisites for this solution. I noticed when I was reading it. So the Trusted Advisor must be enabled in the account, and the account must have business, enterprise on-ramp, or enterprise support. So
they're not cheap either.
So you can't use this unless you have one of those business, enterprise on-ramp, or enterprise
and
support.
I suppose maybe that makes sense, right? Maybe that makes sense because not the Trusted Advisor piece, but in an account where you've got 4 users having exposed access keys, you could probably handle that manually. Like, it's not terrible. Yes, you'd want some sort of way of checking that that's happened, but just force people to rotate them every so often, and you kind of handle the problem. In an organization of 10,000 people, that's just non-viable.
And they're likely in that size of organization to have that sort of support plan across their entire organization. So yeah, cool. Okay, well let's move on from the AWS Cloud Operations and Migrations blog and back to a topic that we initially discussed last week, and that's about this Ofcom and Competition and Markets Authority probe into the dominance of AWS and Microsoft in the cloud computing market. So I think we spoke about it on last week's episode. Certainly it's been in previous newsletters, but the reason I picked out this article again this week is because this one actually dives into some of the interventions that the Competition and Markets Authority could take against AWS and Microsoft based on the outcome of the Ofcom report. So yeah, let's take a look at some of the things that they could do and talk about those. I think one of the first ones it mentions is all about egress fees. So we've definitely spoken about egress fees on the podcast before, but the article is talking about the Competition and Markets Authority potentially prohibiting cloud providers from charging egress fees, or changing the way in which they do that. So, what are your thoughts on this one?
Egress fees have always struck me as a bit naughty, to be honest, be that AWS or Google or Microsoft or whoever. It's always struck me as a bit naughty because there's no ingress fees for anything ever, as far as I'm aware, certainly in AWS. So the argument that you're charged based on the amount of data that you're moving through their hardware because of costs just kind of doesn't wash to me, because if it costs 9 cents a gigabyte, I think that's the latest number, to move data on the way out, why doesn't it cost 9 cents a gigabyte on the way in? Well, because they want your data is why. There's a business reason for them wanting your data, and there's a business reason for them wanting to not let go of your data. It's this kind of switching cost. It's a sticking point, as it were.
Yeah, I think there is an element of it being to do with traffic profiles of a cloud provider or a hosting company. So generally, the size of the pipes that you need to transfer data in and out are determined by whichever is bigger, in or out. And typically, in a cloud provider, data going out is bigger than data going in because you're hosting stuff,
web requests
and people
and
are
things.
accessing it and downloading data from your cloud. So I think there's an element of that just to try and help justify it somewhat.
Yeah, but in that vein, then surely if you charge 9 cents a gigabyte on the way in, you just won't pay very much because you're not sending a lot in. So it just doesn't wash with me. The thing is, though, this is one of those we kind of accept it and take it on the chin, because my concern with this, and I get this from Ofcom's perspective, I genuinely do, but my concern with this is if they ban them from charging egress fees or change how that works, those fees aren't going away. They're just going to get moved somewhere. So rather than 9 cents a gigabyte egress, it will be, 4 out and 5 in, something like that.
Yeah.
So yes, granted, that will probably reduce the costs, but they're just going to move the numbers around.
Rob from Peter to pay Paul. So egress is one thing. What else did they talk about?
Interoperability, which again is a funny one because I'm a bit of a stickler for I don't believe in cloud lock-in. It's, yes, 100% it's a thing, but if you're operating in a way that you're trying desperately to avoid it, you're missing the point. You're missing the point, because if you're saying, well, we don't want lock-in, we're just going to use containers. Okay, fine, but EKS and AKS and GKE all work rather differently. Yes, they all run Kubernetes, but using the managed services, they work rather differently from each other and just kind of how control planes and things hang together. So in order to avoid that sort of lock-in, you then need to spin up VMs, okay, and then run your own Kubernetes control plane and then run all your own nodes and not take advantage of auto-scaling and a whole bunch of other things that you're kind of missing. And then anyway, all the different providers launch servers differently from each other. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating fallacy, as it were. By trying to avoid lock-in, you just spend more money.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there was a subject of committed spend discounts that they also mentioned may need to be addressed. Do you think those are an issue?
I mean, I mean, what are they saying? Because I didn't see that bit, but I didn't read this particularly well.
So the article, I'm just reading the section now, but where the issue of committed spend discounts is concerned, any interventions could have damaging implications for customers. Ofcom acknowledges this is because while these setups do incentivize firms to use one form of cloud technology or another, the money customers save is important to them, but these schemes also provide some degree of investment certainty for suppliers. So I'm not really sure. I guess they're saying it's a form of lock-in, I suppose.
Well, it is. But I mean, fundamentally, yes, these hyperscalers have got all the money in the world compared to most of their customers, but their accountants still like certainty. This is the thing with finance people generally, and I think I said this in my talk a little while ago about serverless, is finance people don't always care what the number is. You know, it could be 10, it could be 1,000, it could be a million. They don't really care. They want to know what it is ahead of time. That's what they care about, because then they can predict it, they can track it, they can do budgets against forecasts and forecasts against budget and all the rest of it. So I don't particularly see that as a problem. And honestly, I don't know what Ofcom are going to be able to do about that one anyway. Like, you must just lower all of your prices. They can't mandate that.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? So let's keep
it's
an
going
eye
to
on.
rumble on for ages, and
Of course it
ultimately
is.
not a lot will come of it, I think.
Probably not, but we shall see. But there we are. Those are some of the potential interventions that could be imposed on AWS and Microsoft as a result of this probe. So let's keep an eye on it as it does rumble on, and see what ends up coming out of it, if anything. But on to our final article for this week. And of course, we couldn't have a podcast episode at the moment without talking about AI. So let's talk specifically about one aspect of generative AI, which is CodeWhisperer. And this is an article on IT Pro asking the question about why AWS isn't adding new languages to CodeWhisperer just yet. So CodeWhisperer currently supports 15 languages. So that's quite a lot anyway. But why is AWS not adding more languages to CodeWhisperer?
Well, I mean, the article spells this out in the second line, basically. It's feature parity. So as it currently stands, not all languages, all 15 of them, are equal within CodeWhisperer. Things like Python and I think TypeScript are treated rather better than like Rust or other things that it supports, because I don't know, maybe there's less demand for it, or maybe it was just easier to get things going, or maybe there's a greater corpus of material available to learn from, that kind of thing. So I suspect that's a part of it, but it's going to be feature parity, because you do not get the same experience between languages in CodeWhisperer. You just don't. Like, I've used it with Python, I've used it with TypeScript, and granted, it just annoys me, but the AWS On Tour event said that I'm probably not the target market for it, because I'm either quite using it wrong, because it's quite good at building test data, and okay, but I don't do a huge amount of that. And it's quite good at doing the low impact stuff that you still need to do. And when you've been working in a language for a while, when you've been a developer for a while, that's a lot less of a thing, as it were. You still have to do all of it, but you do it so quickly and so well that you just kind of smash out and it's done. Whereas a newer developer is going to struggle with that kind of low impact stuff, and it still needs to happen. But yeah, it's one of those, because there's so many languages it supports already, I think they want to get all of them up to kind of the same level before adding new things in.
Yeah, it does mention at the end, and this is something we spoke about in our preamble, that of the 15 programming languages that CodeWhisperer can generate, initialization will only be available for Python, Java, and JavaScript. Doug 7 stated in the immediate future, the service will also extend to TypeScript and C#. So I guess, getting initialization for all 15 languages prior to adding new languages will be important. And I did notice that the product manager here, his name is Doug 7. I was wondering, is that his name, or are there just lots of Dougs in his team? Is there a Doug 6 and a Doug 8? Probably shouldn't have said that out loud, though, should I? But apologies,
No, I
Doug,
think that
if
was
you're
an
listening.
inside thought.
So, anything else? Anything else to say on that one, John, or have I thrown you there with my?
I mean, I understand the logic behind this. I do. I'm a little bit annoyed though, because what I really want CodeWhisperer to start supporting is Terraform and CloudFormation, because the amount of boilerplate in those things that it can just automate away for you would be amazing.
Well, you know who to speak to. Doug Seven. Look him up. See if he's on Community Builders Slack and give him your feedback. I know just before we wrap up that you were a little bit kind of lukewarm on CodeWhisperer, but after the AWS on Tour event, I think you were slightly warmer. How are you feeling about it now?
Tiny bit.
Because what the article does say is that it's progressing so rapidly at the moment that if you looked at it a couple of weeks ago, that it probably looks very different now than it did a couple of weeks ago. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an engineer, right? I'm not a developer day to day, so it's less useful to me. The issue I had with it was I found it either wrong quite a lot. In one case, it suggested a stub function back to me that I'd written, like so I could lay the script out right, and I'd put a little stub in that says, this is going to do this, and then I asked it to write the thing because all it was doing was talking off to a service, and it should have been able to do that, and it just gave me my stub back, and I was very unimpressed by that. And then the other thing is I found it kind of quite pushy. And maybe that's just the way that it's integrated with the IDE, but it was like constantly getting in the way. So,
yeah, I think the article talks to that actually, that it's now making less suggestions than it did. So perhaps that feedback has been taken on board, and it's making fewer higher quality suggestions. So maybe it is time for you to take a look at it again and let it whisper a few more lines of code in your ear.
That's a disturbing thought.
Absolutely. But on that note, we have reached the end of our time for this week. So thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, that was season 2, episode 37 of Logicast. John and I will be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. In the meantime, if you enjoyed it, tell your friends. You can download us from wherever you get your podcasts. So we'll be back again next week. See you again next time.